Shalom and welcome back to the Messiah Yeshua. I'm glad you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Shoftim. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Deuteronomy 16:18 through 21:9, which will connect us to Isaiah 51:12 through 52:12, as well as John 14:9 through 20. And let's start with the Torah portion summary. The Torah commands the Jewish people to appoint judges and establish a judicial system. Some legal questions will be too difficult for the local judges to decide. These should be brought down to a higher court. The highest court is the legislative body operating out of the place which the Lord your God chooses. For example, the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. God gives legislation regarding the appointment of a king over Israel. In addition to prohibitions on multiplying horses and wives, the king of Israel is commanded to immerse himself in the Torah. He must write his own copy of the Torah onto a scroll. He is to keep it with him always, and he is to read and study from it every day of his life. He is not to turn away from it, neither to the right or to the left. Participation in the occult arts is forbidden. Rather than turn to the occult for contact with the supernatural, Israel is to turn to God's prophets and the word of God spoken through them. Moses tells the children of Israel that the Lord will one day raise a prophet like me from among you, from your own countrymen, Deuteronomy 8:15. Moses goes on to reiterate the laws of the cities of refuge and to give instructions for going to war, including rules of conduct in siege warfare. The portion ends with the unusual ritual of the heifer of unknown murderer. If the body of a murder victim is found and the assailant cannot be ascertained, the elders of the village closest to the murder scene are to absolve themselves of responsibility for the murder in a ritual involving killing a heifer over a stream of water. The ceremony removes the uncleanness engendered by the murdered man's blood. And what exactly is Shoftim? The word Shoftim means judges. It is also the name of the 48 reading from the Torah, which begins with the words, "You shall appoint for yourself judges," Shoftim, Deuteronomy 16:18. Within this Torah portion are several laws governing the judicial process and other institutions of state. The establishment of law courts, the clerical roles of the priests and Levites, rules about prophets and criteria for choosing a king, the testimony of witnesses, limitations on king's sovereignty, and instructions concerning warfare. And we'll start with the judges. You shall appoint for yourself judges and officers in all your towns which the Lord your God has given you, according to your tribes, Deuteronomy 16:18. How do you picture a judge? Is he a man wielding a gavel, wearing a powdered wig and black robe, sitting behind the bench? The book of Judges tells stories from the era when Israel was governed judges. The judges over Israel might have worn robes of some type, but they didn't wear wigs. Think of the stories of Deborah, Samson, and Gideon. Israel's judges were more than just exalted lawyers. They were fearsome warriors, inspired prophets, and inspiring heroes. Moses told the children of Israel to appoint judges who could interpret and enforce the Torah. The Israelites were to have courts of law in every city. After the days of Moses, but before the days of Saul, the first king of Israel, the judges were the only civil authority over the tribes. They were the tribal elders and prominent men. The tribes cooperated with one another in a loosely banded confederation under the government of their judges. And what is a righteous judgment? They shall judge the people with righteous judgment. We see that in Deuteronomy 16:18. The Torah commands the judges to judge the people with righteous judgment. And Deuteronomy 16:20 says, "Justice and only justice you shall pursue." What does it mean to pursue justice? For a judge seated in a court of law, the pursuit of justice is commandment to judge fairly. You shall not distort justice, you shall not be partial, and you shall not take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Deuteronomy 16:19. The Proverbs say that to do righteousness and justice is desired by the Lord more than a sacrifice. And that's from Proverbs 21:3. God is the ultimate judge of the universe. He is very concerned with matters of justice. Injustice grieves him. It is contrary to his character and essence. A just judge is an agent of God. So perhaps this is why the sages say that when a court of 2 or 3 judges renders righteous judgments, God's divine presence rests among them. It says, a judge who gives an honest judgment causes the divine presence, the Shekinah, to dwell in Israel, as it is written in Psalm 82:1. God presides in the great assembly. He gives judgment among the judges. And he who does not give honest judgments causes the divine presence to depart from Israel. And that's from B. Sanhedrin 7:8. Also, how do you know that if 3 are sitting as court of law, the divine presence is with them? For it is said, he gives judgment among the judges. And that's also from B. Berachot 6:8. Most of us will probably never have to serve in a court of law or even as congregational leaders. However, we still have a responsibility to pursue justice for others. When we see others unjustly used, abused, and jeopardized, we should do whatever is in our power to right the situation. Believers must stand up for the rights of the oppressed. We have a responsibility to lobby for justice and exert social pressure for the sake of justice. However, the Master warns us not to prosecute to defend our own rights. Instead, he tells us to forgive injustices committed against our own person, turn the other cheek, and repay evil with good. It says, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Matthew 5:40-41. In 1 Corinthians 6, the Apostle Paul complained against the Corinthians because they were lodging lawsuits against one another. He said that even if a believer were to win a case against another believer, it would not be a victory but a loss. A disciple of the Messiah should choose to suffer injustice rather than press his claim against another brother. It says, actually then it is already a defeat for you that you have lawsuits with one another. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? On the contrary, you yourselves wrong and defraud. You do this even to your brethren. 1 Corinthians 6:7-8. So this seems like a contradiction. On one hand, God tells us to pursue justice, but on the other hand, the Master tells us, do not resist an evil person. Matthew 5:39. Paul tells us to pass over offenses committed against us. The reason we are to forego demanding justice for ourselves is that we are to rely on the just judgment of God. We are to leave retribution in the hands of God. By forgiving the sins that others commit against us, we hope to also receive God's forgiveness of our sins. It says, in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Matthew 7:2. So nevertheless, we must not apply our personal prerogative for clemency to others who suffer injustices. For example, suppose you saw a man steal a woman's purse. You pursued and caught the man. You would not have the right to forgive the man and free him from the punishment of law on the woman's behalf. There would be an injustice against the woman. If the man stole your purse, however, you might choose to drop the charges against him and let him go. And we'll talk about a hierarchy of courts. If any case is too difficult for you to decide, Deuteronomy 17:8. Moses told the Israelites to appoint judges in every town. When a person had questions about how to keep a commandment, or when a person was accused of breaking the law, or when there was a dispute between a man and his fellow, the case was to be brought to a local court. If a case proved to be too difficult for local judges, they were to bring the matter to the higher court, which would convene in the place which the Lord your God chooses. Deuteronomy 17:8. As we learn in the commandments on Deuteronomy 12, the place was the temple in Jerusalem. The judges at the temple comprised the highest court in the land. In the days of the apostles, this high court was referred to as the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is a loan word from Greek Sanhedrion, that literally means a sitting together, hence a council. Tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud describes the function of the Torah's legal system as it operated in the days of the apostles. In apostolic era, there were different types of Sanhedrins. The Great Sanhedrin was the highest court in the land. It was composed of 71 members, corresponding to Moses and the 70 elders God placed over Israel. The Great Sanhedrin met in a chamber of hewn stone, a special courtroom inside the Holy Temple. The president over the Great Sanhedrin was called the Nasi, a word that literally means prince. In the days of the apostles, Paul's teacher, Gamliel, was the Nasi over the Sanhedrin. Gamliel seems to have been subordinate to the powerful and wicked high priest, Caiaphas. Several smaller Sanhedrins functioned as lower courts. The small Sanhedrin, or petit courts, were composed of 23 members each. The judge who presided over a small court was referred to as the Rosh, which means head. Every town in Israel with more than 120 men was required to have a small Sanhedrin. In addition, 2 small Sanhedrins in Jerusalem served as high courts under the Great Sanhedrin. One met at the gate of the temple courtyard, and the other met at the entrance of the Temple Mount. Communities with fewer than 120 men, but more than 9, were presided over by a court of 3 judges called a Beit Din, which means the house of judgment. The Beit Din was the lowest court in the land. It was composed of a minimum of 3 judges who presided in the local synagogues. They were the congregational leaders and elders over their communities. So just a little bit of a recap. Sanhedrin Gedolah is the great court, 71 members, and it was in a temple. Sanhedrin Katana, small court, 23 members, towns of 120 men or more, and Beit Din is the house of judgment, 3 members, towns of fewer than 120 men, but more than 9. The Torah gives the higher courts the authority to decide difficult cases, such as homicide and capital offenses. Furthermore, it gives the high court the authority to adjudicate questions of Torah. So when the Beit Din was uncertain about a matter of law, they were to take the questions to the small court. If the case was determined to be too difficult for the small court, it would be sent to one of the small courts in Jerusalem. If the case could not be decided there, it was sent to the great court of Sanhedrin. The decision of the great court was final. And it says, according to the terms of the law which they teach you, and according to the verdict which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the word which they declare to you to the right or to the left. Deuteronomy 17:11. An example of this legal system at work can be seen among early believers. In Acts 15, it tells us about how a question arose in the congregation in Antioch. The believers in Antioch disagreed about whether Gentile believers should be required to become Jewish and thereby obligated to the whole Torah in the same manner as Jewish believers. The local elders, Beit Din in Antioch, decided the question was too difficult for them to resolve. They brought the matter to a higher court in Jerusalem. The Council of the Apostles in Jerusalem may have been a small Sanhedrin, composed of 23 elders among the believers, or it may have been a council of 71 in imitation of the Great Sanhedrin. James, the brother of the Master, seems to have functioned as the Nasi over the court of the believers. The court in Jerusalem decided the matter, issued a ruling, and then published the ruling by sending it to all the congregations of believers around the world. The original Torah legal system practiced by the apostolic communities was lost after the Second Jewish Revolt in 135 CE. After that time, we no longer had a higher court to which we could turn for direction and leadership. Christian ecclesiastical structures rose to fill the vacuum, but those new structures of authority were not Torah-based. Bring back our judges as it was at first, and our counselors as it was in the beginning, and remove grief and groaning from us, and reign over us, you, O Lord, alone, with devotion and with compassion, and make us righteous in judgment. Blessed are you, O Lord, King, who loves acts of righteousness and judgment. And that's the 11th blessing of the Amidah. We'll talk about king and judge. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, you say, I will set a king over me. Deuteronomy 17:14. The highest judge in Israel was the king. When I think of a king, I usually think of someone like King Arthur. He has a crown and a royal robe. He sits on a throne in a castle. Since he is the monarch, he has the absolute power and can do whatever he likes. The kings of Israel did have crowns. They probably had royal robes. They sat on thrones in their palaces, but they could not do whatever they liked. The kings of Israel were more like exalted judges than absolute monarchs. They were like super judges. In the days of the kings, people with legal disputes brought their difficult cases to the king. The Bible provides several examples of legal cases set before the kings. When David's son Absalom campaigned for the position of a king, he said, "Oh, that one would appoint me judge in the land, then every man who has any suit or cause could come to me and I would give him justice." 2 Samuel 15:4. And Solomon was respected because the people of Israel saw the wisdom of God that was in him to administer justice. 1 Kings 3:28. God appointed men as kings to do justice and righteousness. That's 1 Kings 10:9. And the proverb says that a king sits on the throne of justice. Proverbs 28. The prophet Jeremiah says that the coming of the Messiah will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. Jeremiah 23:5. So what is theocracy and monarchy? When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you and you possess it and live in it, and you say, "I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me." Deuteronomy 17:14. This passage until Deuteronomy 20, 17:14 to 20, provides the laws governing the appointment of kings and the limits on their sovereignty. These laws apply only to the kings over Israel. It is unclear whether God was commanding Israel to have a king or not. Was having a king a command or a concession? The Torah does not say you shall appoint a king, in the same way that it says you shall appoint for yourself judges and officers. And that's in Deuteronomy 16:18. The Lord did not give an absolute command to appoint a king, but merely permission to appoint one. The command to appoint a king depends on the people of Israel demanding one first. There was to be no king until the people of Israel said, "I will set a king over me, like all the nations who are around me." So ideally, Israel was not supposed to need a king. The nations was meant to be governed as theocracy. The theocracy is a government presided over by a god. The Lord was to be the king over Israel. He gave his royal law to the people. A justice system of courts was to enforce the law on his behalf. The judges were heads over the tribal confederation, teaching Torah and providing military leadership when necessary. The prophets were to speak for God and give direction to the nation. And the priesthood was to instruct people and maintain their relationship with God. The theocracy theory of government worked well so long as the people were committed to heeding the Torah. With all the tribes observing the Torah and turning to the Lord for leadership and guidance, no further central government was necessary. The book of the Judges demonstrates that the theocracy theory did not work so well in application. Without a strong central authority, the people strayed from the commandments of Torah. The book of Judges describes how subsequent generations arose who did not know the Lord, did evil in the eyes of God, and worshipped the gods of the Canaanites. Story after the story in the book of Judges shows how Israel failed to live according to the theocratical ideal. Even the judges themselves, men like Gideon and Samson, provided poor models of the Torah observance. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's Judges 21:25. The people of Israel came to the prophet Samuel, who was serving as priest, prophet, and judge. They said, "Appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations." 1 Samuel 8:5. In other words, they were rejecting the theocracy from form of government and requesting a monarchy. The Lord told prophet Samuel, "They have rejected me from being a king over them." 1 Samuel 8:7. The people wanted a king they could see, a human being who could administer justice, enforce the Torah, ride out to battle at the head of their armies, and rally the tribes together. The Lord instructed Samuel to do as the people requested. Samuel established the monarchy over Israel, and he warned the people that a king would make their lives difficult. He warned them that a human king would limit their freedom and demand service and tribute. It turned out that the monarchy form of government had serious drawbacks too. The history of Israel's kings demonstrates the weakness of the monarchy system of government. Israel's fortunes rose when they were governed by a godly, Torah-observing king, but they suffered punishments when they were governed by wicked kings. When a godly king followed the Torah, there was a great blessing for the nation, as in the days of David and Hezekiah. But whenever the king disregarded the Torah, disaster struck the nation. Even the best of their kings, men such as Saul, David, Solomon, Hezekiah, and Josiah, had human failings and made profound mistakes that led the nation to disaster. So the whole history of Israel reflects the tension between theocracy and monarchy. If only there was a way that the two forms of government could be merged into one. In the Messiah Yeshua, the Son of God, the Torah original ideal of theocracy is united with Israel's desire for monarchy. As the Word made flesh, in whom the fullness of God dwells in bodily form, King Yeshua is able to govern as a divine theocrat and a human monarch simultaneously. I will talk about God's choice. You shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall set a king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Deuteronomy 17:15. So the Torah says that the king over Israel had to be an ethnic Israelite, not a Gentile or a convert to Judaism. Moreover, the king was supposed to be a man specifically chosen by God for the task. If Israel was to insist on monarchy, they would have to submit to the Lord's choice. This is reminiscent of other ancient Near Eastern nations where a covenant with a vassal nation was involved. So in the Near Eastern treaties, the suzerain exercised oversight over the king chosen by any vassal state. How did God indicate his choice for who would be king? The stories from the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles illustrate the process. God chose the king over Israel through his prophets. He would tell his prophet to find a certain person and anoint him by pouring oil over his head. The anointing of the man signified God's divine choice and symbolized the investment of God's Spirit on the person. The story of the first king of Israel illustrates the process. Saul was a simple Benjamite farmer. He was out looking for some lost donkeys when his servant suggested that he go inquire of the prophet Samuel for the whereabouts of the donkeys. The prophet Samuel, however, was waiting for Saul, and he had prepared a banquet for him. The previous day, God had told him, "About this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be a prince over my people Israel." 1 Samuel 9:16. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, "Behold, the man of whom I spoke to you, this one shall rule over my people." 1 Samuel 9:17. And the next morning Samuel took Saul aside, took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head, kissed him and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you a ruler over his inheritance?" 1 Samuel 10:1. Then Samuel assembled the leaders of Israel. They cast lots to see who the Lord might choose from among them as king over Israel. The lot fell to Saul. A man anointed with oil for the office of king is called an anointed one. The Hebrew word for anointed one is Mashiach, which is translated from Aramaic as Messiah, translated again into Greek as Christos, and again translated from Greek to English as Christ. So, as I've told you before, it's always best to, if we talk about Jesus Christ, always best to use his real name, Yeshua HaMashiach, because all these translations, they take out the real meaning behind the name. A translation of translation of translation, it is not the same and does not hold the same power of original word. And in English, a Christ or anointed one was a person God had chosen to be king. In that literal sense of the word, every king of Israel was Christ over the nation. Prophets spoke of a future chosen king, the coming Christ, who would be the ultimate king over Israel. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. Isaiah 42:1. Horses, women, and money. Very interesting topic. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, he shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Deuteronomy 17:16-17. The Torah limited the size of king's military, the size of his harem, and the size of his wealth. Large armies and chariot forces, big harems, and vast wealth were typical of Near East kings long before the days of Moses. When the text says that the king of Israel could not multiply horses, it is in reference to his standing military. Horses were for military purposes. The Torah was really telling the king not to make his standing army too large. The limits on the personal military, wives, and wealth were limits on the king's capacity for self-aggrandizement. The Torah's limits on the king's wives, wealth, and military are limits on the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life. 1 John 2:16. So, for example, sex, money, and power. If God refused to allow a king of Israel to indulge his appetites for sex, money, and power, how much more should we, who are not kings, be circumspect in regards to those ambitions? King Solomon tested the theory and multiplied horses, women, and money. In addition to the prohibitions against expanding his military, harem, and wealth, the king of Israel was commanded to continually occupy himself in the Torah. He was to write out his own copy of the Torah onto a scroll. He was to keep it with him always, and he was to read and study from it every day of his life. He was not to turn away from it, either to the right or to the left. Even for a king, the Torah of God is standard. The king of Israel needed to be well versed in the Torah because he was required to render judgment as high judge over Israel. The king was to write a copy of the Torah for himself, to remind himself that he was not above God's law. In the eyes of the Torah, the king is just another citizen of God's kingdom. If God requires the king of Israel to be daily engaged in the study of the Torah and carefully keep its commandments, how much more so should we be busying ourselves with the matters of the Torah? And we'll talk about the priesthood. The Lord your God has chosen him and his sons from all your tribes to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. Deuteronomy 18:5. Israel's government had no separations between church and state. In addition to serving in the temple, the priests and Levites filled roles as judges over Israel. Deuteronomy 17:9 suggests that the high court, Great Sanhedrin, was to be presided over by the Levitical priesthood. Later on this Torah portion, Moses explicitly says that the priests and Levites are responsible for judicial matters. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to serve him and to bless in the name of the Lord. And every dispute and every assault shall be settled by them. That's in Deuteronomy 21:5. So because of this, men of Levitical lineage are preferred for appointment to Torah courts of law. Deuteronomy 18 reaffirms that the Levites and the priests were not to have any inheritance of tribal territory in Israel. Instead, they were to be supported by a system of tithes, gifts, and dues. Ever since the destruction of the temple, the priests and the Levites have been out of work, so to speak. They are no longer on the public dole. However, they have not lost their station. The descendants of Aaron are still and always will be priests before God and over Israel. The Torah says that God has chosen the Aaronic priesthood to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. Deuteronomy 18:5. For that reason, we should not speak of the Aaronic priesthood as if it has been cancelled or abolished. Wrong spiritual direction. Those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners, but as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. Deuteronomy 18:14. It is natural for people to seek spiritual direction for their lives. Uncertainty about the future, difficulty rendering an important decision, apprehension over an unpredictable circumstance, or even a simple curiosity inspire people to seek information from the supernatural. The concept of the theocracy assumes that the people of the nation will make decisions according to the supernatural direction. The Torah warns us not to seek a spiritual direction from the occult. It says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughters pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead." Deuteronomy 18:10-11. So most importantly, all of these things are possible, and many people practice them. But God forbids us to consult the soothsayers, palm readers, fortune tellers, mediums, psychics, and the like. Horoscopes, very important one. Seances, Ouija boards, divination, spellcasting, and all other forms of occult arts are utterly forbidden. The Torah says that whoever practices occult arts is detestable to the Lord. Deuteronomy 18:12. The Didache, a compendium of instructions to Gentile believers, composed sometime in the late 1st century or early 2nd century, states that occultism is a form of idolatry. It says, "Do not practice magic. Do not use potions. My child, do not be a diviner, because this leads to idolatry. Nor be one who casts spells, nor one who studies astrology, nor one who performs purification rites. Do not even desire to see these things, for from all these things idolatry results." Didache 2:2 and 3:4. So the occult is the realm of the demonic, we can say. Playing with the occult is an invitation to bring demonic activity straight into our lives. A story from our friend, he says that his father grew up in a Swedish pioneer community in northern Minnesota where the superstitions of the old world Europe were still prevalent. When his father was very young, his grandmother decided to visit the local fortune teller to see what the future held. The fortune was not good. Among several other dire calamities, the fortune teller explained to his grandmother that her husband would die in the coming year. Everything happened just as the fortune teller had predicted. It was awful to know what was going to happen before it happened. And his grandmother told his father. She ruled the decision ever after. Curiosity sometimes draws young people to experiment with the occult. When our friend was a teenager, some girls at the neighbor's house decided to experiment with hypnosis to see if they could find their way into their past lives. They became alarmed when one of the girls suffered a sudden seizure, spoke in strange voices, and exhibited unnatural strength. His father read psalms to the girl until she returned to her right mind, but ever after she suffered supernatural vexations and eventually sought exorcism. So we're basically just opening the doors to these demonic realms every time we practice those things. And, there's a big teaching that says every opening that we have in our body is a gate. So our eyes is a gate. We should guard what we see. Our ears are gates. We should guard what we hear. And our mouth is also a gate. We should guard our tongue and what we speak. So very important. And we'll go into right spiritual direction. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. From among you, from your countrymen, you shall listen to him. Deuteronomy 18:15. Rather than turn to the occult for contact and with the supernatural, Israel is to turn to God's prophets. Wouldn't it be nice if there were reliable prophets like Moses today? Imagine having the ability to seek counsel directly from God. Suppose you were trying to decide whether a certain person was the right was right for you to marry. Few decisions in life are so momentous. If there was ever a time to seek spiritual direction, it would be at that moment. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to a reliable and true prophet of God and ask the question? The prophet could consult the Lord on your behalf, and you would receive a direct answer. On rare occasions, the gift of prophecy did function like that. But the prophet of God was not a kosher fortune teller. The true prophet could only speak what God gave him to speak. He could not force an answer from God. Ordinarily, it was God who initiated a prophecy by sending a prophet out to deliver a message. In today's world, true prophets are sparse. Word from the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. 1 Samuel 3:1. But we are not left without spiritual direction. First of all, we have the written word of God, which was spoken and recorded by the prophets. Our Bible is a written transcript of God's conversations with the prophets. The Torah is the written word of Moses, the greatest of the prophets. It is the 5 books of full spiritual direction for our lives. The Gospels contain the very words of Yeshua. The writer of the book of Hebrews reminds us that God spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, and in these last days has spoken to us in His Son, Hebrews 1:1-2. When we are in need of spiritual direction, the first place we should look is inside our Bibles. In addition to that, God has placed His Holy Spirit within every true believer and follower of His Son. To the extent that we attune our hearts to the sense He's leading and turn our ears to hear His voice, God's Spirit will offer us leading and direction. When we are in need of spiritual direction, we should ask, seek, and knock, pouring out our hearts in prayer. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Matthew 7:8. God is willing and able to provide us with direction and counsel through His Word and through His Spirit. On occasion, He might even send a prophet. But beware, there are many false prophets. The mysterious prophet. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I have commanded him. Deuteronomy 18:18. Moses told the children of Israel that the Lord would one day raise a prophet like me from among you, from your own countrymen. Deuteronomy 18:15. This promise could be understood in 2 ways. According to Rashi, it refers to the succession of prophets who would speak to Israel. Rashi explained that God would raise prophets like Moses, from prophet to prophet. God did not leave Israel without prophetic voice. He raised the line of prophets, beginning with Joshua, the servant of Moses, and extending all the way to John the Immerser, as the scripture says, for all the prophets and the Torah prophesied until John, Matthew 11:13. Despite the merits of Rashi's explanation, the passage does not literally speak of succession of many prophets. Deuteronomy 34:9-10 proves that the promise of the prophet like Moses was not referring to Joshua. Even after Joshua was filled with the prophetic spirit, the Torah still says that no prophet like Moses had yet arisen. It says, now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Since that time no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Deuteronomy 34:9-10. Therefore, the prophecy in Deuteronomy 18 could not have been referring to Joshua or any of the prophets who followed him. Instead, it refers to a single prophet whom God would raise up in the future. The man would be a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Deuteronomy 34:10. What would a prophet like Moses look like? He would need to be a prophet who directly heard from God, like Moses did. He would need to be a redeemer of Israel, like Moses was. He would need to be a man of unsurpassed humility, like Moses was. Who is this mysterious prophet? The prophet like Moses is none other than the Messiah. The apostles understood the prophecy of the prophet like Moses to refer directly to Yeshua. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider Yeshua, the apostle of the high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. Hebrews 3:1-3. Moving a neighbor's boundary stone. You shall not move your neighbor's boundary mark which the ancestors have set in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess. Deuteronomy 19:14. An English maxim has it that good fences make good neighbors. In biblical times, territorial borders were marked off with the boundary stones. Typically, a boundary stone landmark might be one stone set up on the end indicating the border between the man's field and the neighbor's. During the settlement of American territories, a similar method was used. Settlers would set up rocks or drive in stakes to indicate parcels of land that they were claiming. Hence the idiom staking a claim. Often it happened that in their absence, unscrupulous neighbors or other settlers would remove these landmarks to their own advantage. It was the same in the biblical era. An unscrupulous neighbor might move a boundary stone and steal 100 feet of your field. According to the prophet Hosea, God pours out his wrath like water on those who move boundary stones. The Torah places a special curse on someone who moved a boundary stone, saying, "Cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark." Deuteronomy 27:17. The Proverbs warn against moving boundaries and especially against encroaching on the boundaries of a widow and orphans. It says, "Do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set. Do not move the ancient boundary or go into the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their case against you, but he will establish the boundary of the widow." That's Proverbs 22:28 as well as 23:10-11 and 15:25. The prohibition against moving a boundary stone can be applied to many situations in life. It reminds us that God deems it healthy and appropriate to maintain proper boundaries and distinctions. For example, boundaries that maintain a distinction between genders are important, especially in our age, it seems. A person should always be careful to protect the boundaries between private life and public life, between family and friends, between parents and child, between husband and a wife, and so on. When boundary lines become fuzzy, confusion and conflict ensue. The sages teach that we should always maintain a sense of where another person's property and privacy ends and begins. It says, there are 4 types of people. The one who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. This is the normal type of person. But some say this is the type of person who lived in Sodom. The one who says what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine, this type of person is ignoramus. The one who says what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours, this is a righteous person. And the one who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine, that is a wicked person. And that's from Avot 5:10. And we'll head into witnesses. A single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be confirmed. Deuteronomy 19:15. The Torah requires that every matter to be determined by the testimony of at least 2 witnesses. In the Torah court of law, circumstantial evidence was never considered. Only eyewitness testimony could be considered in the determining innocence or guilt. But what would happen if 2 witnesses agreed to perjure themselves and offer false testimony against a person in court? For example, suppose 2 men decided to consort a charge against a neighbor they both resented. They might bring the man to court and both claim to have seen the man intentionally and belligerently breaking the Sabbath. The court would then be compelled to order the poor man stoned. In the book of Acts, false witnesses testified against Stephen. claiming that he taught against the temple, the Torah, and the customs that Moses handed down. False witnesses against Paul made similar claims when he stood trial before the Sanhedrin in Acts 23 and before the Roman court in Acts 24-25. To discourage the likelihood, of a false witness rising against a person, the Torah requires the witnesses against a person to be the ones who carry out a sentence. So hopefully the responsibility of actually stoning a person to death would deter people from bearing false testimony. Moreover, the Torah tells the judges hearing a case to investigate thoroughly. Deuteronomy 19:18. These sages teach that this means that the witnesses should be thoroughly cross-examined. If the witnesses are proven to be false witnesses, they are to receive the punishment that the accused would have received if he had been convicted. In the Gospels, false witnesses testified against Yeshua in his trial before the court of Caiaphas. Cross-examination, however, disqualified their testimony. Mark 14:56 says, "For many were given false testimonies against him, but their testimony was not consistent." The following story from the Apocrypha illustrates the importance of a vigorous cross-examination. And this is a good story. It goes like this. The book of Susanna is a Greek addition to the book of Daniel. Though Protestants and Jews regard the book as apocryphal, it is included as the 13th chapter of Daniel in Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles. The name Susanna is transliteration of the Hebrew Shoshana, a name that means lily. So Shoshana was a pious Jewish woman living with her husband in Babylon during the days of Daniel the prophet. Two elders of the community conspired together to blackmail her into committing adultery with them. They told her that if she did not consent, they would testify against her in court by claiming to have seen her committing adultery with another man. Shoshana refused to be blackmailed. She replied, "It is better for me to fall into your hands and not do this sin than to sin in the sight of the Lord." And that's Susanna 123, KJA. The two false witnesses testified against her in the court of law, saying, "As we walked in the garden alone, this woman came in. Then a young man who there was hid came on to her and lay with her. Then we that stood in a corner of the garden, seeing this wickedness, ran unto them. And when we saw them together, the man we could not hold, for he was stronger than we, and opened the door and leaped out. But having taken this woman, we asked who the young man was, but she would not tell us. These things do we testify." That's from Susanna 1:36-40. Based upon the testimony of these two eyewitnesses, the court agreed to have Shoshana put to death for the sin of adultery. Just then the prophet Daniel spoke up and said, "Are ye such fools, ye sons of Israel, that without examination or knowledge of the truth you have condemned a daughter of Israel? Put these two aside, one far from the other, and I will examine them." And that's from Susanna 1:48 and 51. Daniel asked the first witness to describe what he had seen. The witness told him that he had seen Shoshana and the young man under the mastic tree in a very small tree. Daniel then interrogated the second witness, who reported seeing them under an oak tree, a very large tree. Using this discrepancy in their testimony to disqualify the witnesses, Daniel exonerated Shoshana and condemned the two witnesses, who were then put to death. So according to the Torah of Moses, they did unto them in such sort as they maliciously intended to do to their neighbor, and they put them to death. Thus the innocent blood was saved the same day, and that's Susanna 1:62. It also connects, if the witness is a false witness and he has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him just as he had intended to do to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Deuteronomy 19:18-19. And we'll talk about warfare. When you are approaching the battle, the priest shall come near and speak to the people. Deuteronomy 22. Men were not to be compelled to fight against their will. Enemies were to be offered terms of peace, and the environment was to be protected. Men were to be granted exemptions from military service on the basis of having built a new house and not yet dedicated it, having planted a vineyard and not yet harvested, having been betrothed and not yet married. We learn elsewhere that the newlywed man is given a year of exemption. The judges, the kings, the priests, and the prophets administered over Israel, and all of them had a role in conducting warfare. As the army prepared for war, a priest rallied the army, encouraged them, emboldened them, prayed for them, and then accompanied them into battle. The book of Judges shows several examples of the judges over Israel organizing and leading military campaigns. Prophets were involved in the military, giving kings and generals advice and guidance from God. Finally, the kings were expected to lead the army into the battle. And Judges and the murder mystery. If a slain person is found laying in an open country in the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess, and it is not known who has struck him, Deuteronomy 21:1, because torahteachings, Shoftim, is primarily concerned with judges and the judicial process, it seems appropriate that it concludes with an absolved murder mystery, or I guess unsolved. The corpse of a murder victim is found in an open field between two towns. The judges from the neighboring towns came out to investigate, but they cannot determine the identity of a murderer. It is a Torah whodunit mystery. Since the judges cannot bring the perpetrator to justice, the guilt of the innocent blood rests upon them. The Torah prescribes a ritual whereby the judges can exonerate themselves from that guilt. And it goes as number 1, elders and judges measure distance from corpse to cities. Then elders and judges conduct ritual for blood guilt. Elders obtain a heifer that has never been yoked. Elders bring heifer to the valley with running water, unplowed ground, and uncultivated ground. Elders kill the heifer over the running water. Member of priesthood steps forward to witness declaration. Elders wash hands over running water. Elders declare innocence from blood guilt. And elders pray for forgiveness for Israel. The judges from the surrounding communities measure the distance from the corpse to their towns. The judges from the town closest to the corpse are held responsible for the guilt of the innocent blood. Those judges slaughter the heifer over a stream of running water as the animal is bled out over the running water. And the elders wash their hands over the water and declare, "Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it. Forgive your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, O Lord, and do not place the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel." That's Deuteronomy 21:8. And that's about it, guys. Lots of good information. Thank you so much for watching. If this message blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It helps a lot for the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments for daily inspiration. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.